Hello, I'm Dave Hart. I'm the preacher for the Warren Avenue Church of Christ in Winslow, Arizona. And if you're ever traveling through Arizona and you're in the Winslow area, please come and visit us. Today we're going to take a look at a sermon entitled, Building Up the Church. Building Up the Church. You know, a couple of weeks ago we had about 14 or so people come out from a Church of Christ in Tennessee, and they came here as a mission trip this year. They wanted to go overseas, but finances, not finances so much, but the worry of COVID still and buying tickets and you know, things changing in that manner, they decided to do a domestic mission trip this year, and they chose our church to do so. And they came here and they did a whole bunch of work, and they gave our building a facelift and helped to fix things and paint and all kinds of things that we needed done. And the church building looks so much better now, and they just did a wonderful job. And we know, of course, the building is not the church. The church building is what the church uses to do the things that God wants us to do, to preach and teach and worship Him and various things of that nature. So we are very happy and blessed to have a building, and we're very happy that we've had a facelift to it, and that's a wonderful thing. But we also need to realize that sometimes we need to do the same thing to the spiritual building of God. The spiritual building of God, which is the church. Sometimes it needs a makeover, a facelift, to be built up and even to be repaired at times. So we're going to take a look today at building up the church, building up the church. And if you are a member of the Lord's church, you have your place in doing so. And there's many different ways that we need to be looking at building the church up. So let's start today by looking at Ecclesiastes 10 verse 18. Ecclesiastes 10 verse 18. Because of laziness, the building decays, and through idleness of hands, the house leaks. So one thing you know if you own a house is that you got to keep repairing it. You got to keep fixing it. Just like this church building. This church building was built around 1945, and I have an office building that I have for a church office, which was built around 1910, and the preacher's house that I live in, I don't know, might have been the 70s, maybe early 80s it was built. So none of them are real new, and they all take a lot of maintenance, a lot of work. You can't just let things go. You can't just sit back and say, okay, we got everything fixed and that's all I'm going to do and it's done and it's finished. You can't do that. We got to keep repairing. We got to keep fixing. And believe me, with 3 old buildings like this, it seems like the fixing of them never ever ends. So the first thing that we have to know is to build up the Lord's spiritual house, just like with a physical house. We have to work. We have to work. We can't be lazy. We have to work at it, and we have to keep working at it. We can't ever get to the point where we say we've made it, and that's all we need to do. Listen, you know, in the last almost 20 years that I've been here in Winslow, I have seen so many ups and downs and ins and outs, and we've always worked to build the church up, to grow the church, and there have been times when the church has grown and we've got to a certain point, and in my mind I really thought, you know, this is just great. We finally got it this big, and now we'll just keep on growing. But every time I've thought that way, given enough time, it's shrunk back down. People die, people move, people leave the church, become less faithful, become shut-ins. All kinds of things happen. Sometimes it's almost like starting over again. So we have to be working at it continually. The work of the church is hard. There are some places where it's harder than others. Out here on the West Coast, it tends to be very hard. You know, I've worked in Arizona, I've worked in California, And the area that I'm at particularly right now, Winslow, is an extremely hard area. All of northern Arizona is extremely hard. There's no churches that you would consider to be a large church in this whole area. So the work is hard, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. That doesn't mean that we should give up, we should slack off, we should ease off. But we must keep at it. We must keep at it. We were doing better before COVID, like many people that I've talked to in many different churches from many different parts of the nation. Now, some of them say they're doing as good as they did before COVID. And some even said they're doing better. But for the most part, churches are struggling to get back just to where they were, as we are. And unfortunately, there has also been an increase in even churches closing. Very sad. Very sad. But regardless of how COVID has affected us, regardless of how anything else has affected us, we must work. We must never give up, and we must keep going. We can't stop. And if we're not excited, we need to get excited again about what we need to do. And I know it can be hard because there again, as I've stated, with the COVID has caused a lot of situations, and our nation is in trouble in so many ways. And you know, the cost of living and just the amount of ungodliness. I mean, we could just go on in despair all day long, couldn't we? I'm not saying these aren't real issues and things that we have to deal with and look at and consider, but I'm saying regardless of those things, the work of the church needs to go on. The work of the church needs to go on. Listen, I have found the work of the church is kind of like playing football. You know, if somebody hikes the ball and you give the ball to the halfback and the halfback tries to, you know, get as many yardage as he can, once in a while he'll gain a whole bunch of yardage all at once, right? And that's wonderful when that happens in church work. I've had it when there's been some times when things have gone really smooth and we were able to so to speak, get that ball down the football field, you know, quite a ways. Other times, the halfback may get a step or two, and then he's crushed by some, you know, 300-pound, muscle-bound goon, and he's thrown to the ground, and it hurts. But he gets back up, doesn't he? He gets back up, and he keeps going, and he keeps going. And so sometimes it's a very small progression forward, one foot at a time, one step at a time. But other times, the halfback may not even get across. May not even get across the line of scrimmage, and he's tackled and he's hit. Sometimes he's hurt. Sometimes he fumbles the ball. Tough things to deal with. But regardless, you still got to get back up and keep going, keep going, keep going. Get that spiritual football, so to speak, down the field a little bit farther. And if you lose yardage, you just need to get back up and you need to keep going. And it's also important to realize that everyone has a part, but everyone's going to have a different part. I've explained it this way before, you go in with the football thing again. Quarterbacks are a very important part of the football team. They're very important. They get the most glory. Let's face it. They get the most glory, and they're an important part of the team. But what happens if you have nothing but quarterbacks? Nothing but quarterbacks. Listen, most of the quarterbacks that I have known have been tall people, or at least taller people, and we know some short people have also been quarterbacks, or shorter people, but generally they've been taller people, and they're not built like linemen. They're usually much thinner built. And a quarterback can be a very good quarterback. You know, quarterback needs to be quick and have a good throwing arm and have a certain degree of intelligence, all that kind of stuff. But if you have a team of nothing but quarterbacks, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Your team is going to get destroyed. Quarterbacks generally are not built to be on the line. They're not even built to be halfbacks or fullbacks to be able to take the kind of punishment that they need to take. Quarterbacks tend to be more fragile. You notice that they tend to get hurt easier and more often because of the way they're built. And they make even special safety things for quarterbacks to try and keep them from getting hurt quite as often. So even though a quarterback is important, necessary, needful, if all you have are quarterbacks, you're not going to get any place. So the church needs you whatever position that you're in. And there again, when I had these wonderful people come from Tennessee to help with the building here, it just made me realize again how useless I am when it comes to any kind of fixing things. Listen, I can break things. I'm great at breaking things. I can break brick or a rock if you give it to me. I'm great at breaking things, but I'm lousy at fixing things. I have no coordination for that. I don't have the knowledge. You know what happens to me when I try to fix things? I usually break the things and I hurt myself. I usually make the things worse than they were before I started. And usually, like when they were here, I'd rip my arm all up, I pulled a hamstring, I hurt my back. You know, I did all these things. And I didn't do much good at all. I moved some things around and stuff like that I could do. But as far as doing actual things, one of the things they did here was put in some new fans for us in the auditorium. And these guys got up there and they knew how to work with electric stuff. They could read the plans and all that. And that's something that you would not want me to do, because you turn the fan on and it would come off and probably hit somebody. So it just showed to me what I already knew, that I'm really useless when it comes to those kind of things. God didn't give me those gifts, those talents, those abilities. Mine are in something else. But listen, I'm so glad and I'm so happy that there are men who can fix things and put things together and do all these things that are needful to be done. In fact, right now, another example is our baptismal has broken. We're going to have to get that fixed. This next week, and I wouldn't know, how to do that at all. But luckily, we have a man here that does, and he has a plan. And he's going to Bible camp, to help out a Bible camp next week. But when he comes back, he's going to get that fixed for us. So if you want to get baptized here in the next week, that would be wonderful, but we're going to have to stick the hose in. It's going to be a cold baptismal. And I've always told people, when you get baptized in cold water, that's a good thing, because it really helps you to remember it more. But anyway, I just want to emphasize that everyone has a part. Everyone has a part in the work of the church, and we need to be at it. We can't ever slack off. We got to keep going, and we should train people for the things we're good at for them to do when something happens to us. If we should happen to become disabled, not be able to do a particular kind of work anymore, or die. We had a wonderful lady here, and she taught the kindergarten kids for years and years and years. Wonderful lady. She did the books, but as she got older, it got too hard for her to get up and down to teach the kids anymore. So somebody else had to take over. And you see, when you've done something for years and years, you got to kind of try to think about that time's going to end someday. We need to train somebody else. She did the books, and she did a wonderful job on the books. Linda was her name. But she also got Alzheimer's at some point, and also had to give that up and teach the next person how to do books. So we need to not only be faithful and do what we can with the tools and gifts, abilities, and finances that God has given us, but we also need to be training others to come up beside us and behind us in order to take over when that day that we will not be able to do the work that we once did. 1 Kings 7 verse 1. 1 Kings 7 verse 1. But Solomon took 13 years to build his own house, so he finished all his house. 13 years, think about that. That's a long time to be waiting to get into your house, isn't it? But it took 13 years to build his house. Building something takes time. Building something takes time, including the spiritual house. It also takes time to build back, as I've told you already, and not just the church here, but every church I've been at has gone through this. You have times of growth where if you're me, sometimes you sit back and you think, great, we made it. Now we just go on from here. It takes time for that growth, but quite often there comes times when the church decreases in attendance, decreases in members. And those are very, very depressing times. Those are times that you really do feel like quitting at times. And you get exhausted sometimes. You get exhausted sometimes. But you got to keep going. And the build back can be very, very difficult and very long. Listen, one of the things that I've done both here and when I was working in California is we'd have these small group studies. Small group studies, and they were studies that were mostly designed for new people to come into the church. Sometimes, coming into a church service because of the way it's structured, a Bible study, morning service, or Wednesday night Bible study service, people, new people especially won't ask questions, and they might feel, dumb if they do, and it can be a harder time to get to know people. Everybody else has kind of known people for a long time, and they could kind of, feel like the stranger. Well, I like doing these small group studies because it's been a way for new people or non-Christians to get to know some people on a more intimate basis. We usually go into a classroom instead of having the study in the auditorium, and it's much more relaxed. And I've found that many times newer people or non-Christians, new Christians, non-Christians, will open up a lot more, ask questions, and you get close to that smaller group easier than you do in a larger group. That sounds kind of funny, doesn't it? Because it would seem like, well, there's more people, but I've found when you have that smaller group, you can get friendships and that kind of stuff a lot quicker. So there again, that's been one of the big ways that we've been able to grow the Lord's church, both in California and here. But those went up and down too. There was times when there were just 3 or 4 people coming, and other times when we'd have 30 or more people coming. So we do not want to get discouraged. We want to keep going. Don't stop. Sometimes you do need to reevaluate what are ways that I and the church could do to reach out to people, to better bring people in, that kind of thing. And sometimes you're doing all that you can, and it's just the timing, it's just the area that you're at, those type of things. But a lot of times if you start thinking about it and you start trying different things, you can start bringing in people, at least a little at a time, and a little at a time builds up to a lot over time. 1 Chronicles 29 verse 1. 1 Chronicles 29 verse 1. Furthermore, King David said to all the assembly, "My son Solomon, whom alone God has chosen, is young and inexperienced. And the work is great because the temple is not for man, but for the Lord God." So there's a lot here. There's a lot packed in here. You must always remember that what we're doing is for God. What we're building is for God. It's not for our glory. It's not just to say, look at how great we are. look at how pretty our building is. And like I said, our building looks a lot prettier right now than it did a couple of weeks ago. But it's not just about it being pretty. We did it for a reason. We did it because we wanted to help maintain the church. And we did it because when visitors did come, we didn't want them to see something that was shabby and ran down and may affect them coming back again. May affect them coming back again. Listen, sometimes we don't think about things like that. But listen, if you would go, let's say you go to a doctor's office and you go in that doctor's bathroom and it's just filthy. It's just filthy. You know, back in the old days, that's how filling station bathrooms used to look. You go in there and they'd be scary. You didn't want to cut yourself in something in there because you'd be scared you'd get tetanus. They stunk. They had flies. Well, if you came to a church building that was like that, you wouldn't want to go back, would you? That's why little things, and we need to thank people to take care of little things. If you have people that clean the church building, that do janitorial work, you need to thank them. You need to thank them because you know what happens with a lot of people that do janitorial work in the church? If anything is dirty or out of place or they missed it or dusty, they get a whole bunch of complaints. They get a whole bunch of complaints, and usually they'll complain to the preacher, the elders. But if they do a good job, if they're doing a good job, most of the time nobody just says anything. Nobody just says anything. So you need to thank those people. So we got to remember that even cleaning a toilet in the church building is something that we do for God. Something that we do for God. We want to do everything that we can to bring people to the Lord and keep people in the Lord. And that includes some things that we may not think of because they may not be a direct spiritual thing, like taking care of the church building, but it is a thing that has an effect, that can have effect on people's spiritual well-being. So we must remember all that we're doing is to the glory of God. It's not to our glory. It's not to our glory. We got to remember, just like Solomon was chosen for this great work to build the temple. You know, David wanted to build the temple. David wanted to build the temple, but he was told that he couldn't do it. He was told that he was a man of blood, and because of that, God didn't want David to be the one to do it. So it was Solomon that was going to build it. And Solomon was going to do this great work. But listen, in order to do that great work, he needed help. He was inexperienced. He needed help. He needed people to help design. He needed people to support him. He needed people to help build. He needed people to help get the supplies and take care of all these things. Feeding the people that are working. I mean, all these things King David's son Solomon needed to do in order to build the temple. So listen, in your church you have elders, you have people that lead. Or if you don't have elders, you have the men. And the minister always wants to do things to help grow the church. So you have men of vision, men who make plans, men who try to find the right path and to do the right thing for growth, but they can't do it alone. Oh no, they can't do it alone. Too many times people in the church think, well, my job is just to come and I'll put in $5 in the bucket when it comes around, and I'll help sing a song or two and listen to the preaching, and I've done my job, and the preacher and the elders and the Sunday school teachers, they can do all the rest. No, 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 no. We all have our place once again. We all need to help. And when the church has a vision, has a plan, we need to support that plan. If we don't feel like we can support the plan, you need to talk to the leaders and explain why you don't feel like you can. And maybe you can come up with a new plan. Or maybe they can help you to understand the plan that they have better. But we need to support the leaders in the church. We need to encourage them to make plans, to have plans, to promote plans, and to go about doing it. And that is what Solomon did, didn't he? Oh, he wasn't perfect in it. No man is. No planning of man, even for the Lord's church, is going to be a perfect plan. But we need to do something, because what's the alternative? Doing nothing. If you don't do nothing, what's going to happen? You're going to get what you've been getting. And I don't know about you guys, but I think that a lot of our churches don't want what we've been getting. We want something more. We need to want something more. We need to be hungry for it. So we need to make good plans. We need to pray about them. We need to think about them. We need to make good plans. And this goes for an individual too, in his service for the Lord. And then we need to execute those plans to the greatest of our ability. We might need to make adjustments. Sometimes we need to scrap plans. Listen, there's been times I've come up with a plan. I just thought, oh, this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I made all these preparations, put all this work into it, sometimes some money, and then it flops. It just plain flops. I remember I'd done that with something here a while back, and I just thought for sure it was going to be a good idea, and it was going to be something to bring in new people. I'm always looking for something to bring in new people. And I advertised and stuff that we were going to have a night that was open to the community, that anybody could come and we could explain about the Church of Christ, and people could ask questions. And we could have some dessert and snacks afterwards and talk some more. And I was just so excited that the congregation went out to dinner together at a restaurant earlier that night, and I rushed back down here and I got all ready for it. And I thought it was mostly going to be me and maybe a couple of people from the church. Well, a lot of the people from the church showed up. But not one person from the community did. And I felt bad there again. I'd advertised this in the paper, put energy, effort, and money into it, and nobody showed up. But God blessed that night anyway. We had a good time. We ended up having a Bible trivia contest between the older members and the younger members, and we had a good time of fellowship, but it didn't work out how I expected it to. But then on the other side of it, there's been things that I've done, in the church thinking, well, let's just do this. And I'm not expecting a lot out of it, but you never know. And that's worked out great at times. Many more people came, many more connections and things than I was expecting. Also, sometimes one thing will work great and the next time it won't. Some things will work in one area and they won't in others. When I came from California, I had never worked outside of California in the ministry. And when I came to Arizona, I really thought I had it. I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was doing. So I got here to Arizona and started implementing all these things that we had used by trial and error in California that worked out really well. And most of those things did not work out here in Arizona, including my preaching. I had to actually even adjust how I preached when I came to Arizona because it was just a different community. It was different people, different backgrounds, different experiences. So we have to look at all those things. And there again, whether they succeed or fail, at least we've tried. We're doing something. Learn some lessons from them and keep on going, keep on going, keep on building, have plans, make plans, test things, and keep supporting the vision, keep supporting the plans that the leaders come up with in order to grow the church. 2 Chronicles 3 verse 3. 2 Chronicles 3 verse 3. This is the foundation which Solomon laid, the building for the house of God. The length was 60 cubits by cubits according to the former measure, and the width 20 cubits. So just like with a physical building, there again, we got to make plans. We just talked about visions, and visions need to turn into plans. I have a vision of a vacation Bible school, and this is what we're going, this is what we would do, and this and that. That's a vision, but then we got to turn those visions into plans. They just didn't go, they just didn't go start throwing stones around and stuff. You might have did that when you was a kid. Me and my kid liked to make forts out in the forest, and we'd gather a whole bunch of branches and things, and we'd gather them together, and it built up a fortification, but there really wasn't much of a plan. It didn't look like much, but in order to do a great work, you got to have great plans. A vision has to move into the area of plans, and you got to sit down and look at a lot of things. Who will do this? Who can do this? Who will be willing to do this? And how much should we do this? If money's involved, how much money should the church put into this? What is it that we should do? So you got to have plans. You got to lay things out, and the better things are laid out, the smoother it's going to go. There's always going to be kinks. I don't care how well you plan it out, there's going to be some kinks, there's going to be some things come up that you didn't think about. I've often told my people here in Winslow, I said, we are the Marines of the Church of Christ. We don't plan, we improvise. We improvise, and we have to do that a lot here, being a smaller church. There's a lot of times we just have to improvise when something happens. Something unforeseen, and that happens, but it's always better to have a plan. Even when we improvise, we usually have a plan set up that we can put in place. So, for the spiritual building to grow, it takes constant planning, constant vision, and we also have to realize there's a pattern. Sometimes there again, we lay out a pattern for the church to evangelize, to edify, for benevolence work. But we also have to remember, we always have to follow the Bible's pattern. The Bible's pattern. A lot of people don't like that word, pattern, or pattern theology. We have to follow the pattern of the Bible. That's what the Bible is. It's a pattern. It's a pattern. And if we don't follow that pattern to overlay all the other patterns we may have for our individual churches or individuals' lives, we are going to fail. The house we're building is going to fall. We have to have a pattern. Listen, when I was young, I got this airplane model kit. It's not the plastic kind, but it was the wood kind, and there was all these sticks, long sticks and everything. I don't even know if you can buy these kind of planes anymore, of all these sticks of balsa wood, and you'd overlay it with this paper they had. And it was a very detailed pattern. And if you didn't follow it exactly, the plane wasn't going to fly. I used to be into Estes rockets. And if you don't know what Estes rockets are, they're these model rockets, and you get these rocket engines, and you put them in, and you ignite them, and the rockets, I mean, they really go up high, really high. And I have been building these rockets for a few years, and I was going to take it to school, and the class was going to come out and watch this exhibition of these rockets. And I decided that I would build my own rocket. Now, I'm no rocket scientist, and I really proved that by this rocket that I built. Now, I thought I built a good rocket. It looked like a rocket, and it was made out of rocket parts, and I sent up my other rockets, and I was really proud, and I went out and I told the class that this was a rocket that I designed. There was no pattern for it. I just designed it out of my own mind. And I put this rocket on the rocket launcher, and I shot it, and in this rocket launcher there was a rod that the rocket went up, and then as soon as it got over the top of the rod, it came back down and started going in circles on the pavement. And each time we went in a circle, it got into a wider circle, until finally it was getting out there where the people were standing around watching, and they started running. So like I said, I'm no rocket scientist, but I didn't have no pattern to follow, and that rocket crashed, just as that airplane, if it didn't follow the pattern, was going to crash. And even plastic models, there was times that I would put something together wrong, And maybe it was a door that was supposed to open on the plastic model, and it wouldn't open, and it was because I put the door in backwards or whatever. Patterns are important. And the Bible is a pattern for us to follow. So for all of our visions and dreams and patterns we may lay out for our individual churches and individual lives as Christians, we got to be sure the master pattern overlays them, and be sure that we're not getting out and away from the pattern that the Bible has laid out for us to do. Because sometimes people think, well, let's just add the instrument. That'll bring more people in. Or let's just do this, or let's just do that. And I've already said, if you want new people into the church, I can do that next week. I can pack this church next week. I can guarantee it. All I have to do is say everybody that comes and listens to the worship service next Sunday gets $100, no strings attached. We'd fill up our buildings, wouldn't we? How many would be back the next week? Probably none. So we got to follow the pattern, and that's not in the pattern. That's not how we make Christians. We got to follow the pattern. Ezra 4, verse 4. Ezra 4, verse 4. Then the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah. They troubled them in building. So remember, here they are. They're trying to build back what used to be Jerusalem and build it back up again. But there are people who were trying to do everything they can to be sure that didn't happen. They were just doing everything they can to be sure that you weren't building, that they weren't able to build it back. We will always have opposition to building the church. We will always have opposition to building the church. They had physical opposition to building a physical body. We will always have spiritual opposition to building the Lord's church. Remember what they had to do? They actually had to put armed guards all around to protect the builders, and the builders themselves carried weapons, and it was a very scary time for them. But they did not stop building for a moment. They didn't let it stop. Listen, folks, this can be a scary time for Christians. I just heard of a church over in Africa. I think it was like 54 people. Some Muslims, I believe, went into this church building and just shot 54 of them. And even here now, hopefully, Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned, and it should be. It's an ungodly, terrible, immoral, shameful law. But we hear of people going into church buildings and acting crazy and doing crazy things. And we know even in one of the Lord's churches down in Texas, there was a gunman that went in there and started killing people. Thank the Lord in heaven, there were people in that church that put an end to that very quickly. But listen, we're always going to have opposition. We're always going to have opposition from outside the church. There's people that hate the Church of Christ. Oh, there's so much against it. Listen, on my ministry pages on the internet, I have people attacking them day and night and just hating what I say. They hate God's word when it comes to baptism. They hate God's word when it comes to not using the instrument of music and worship service. They hate that we say we're not saved by faith. We've got to have faith, but not by faith alone. And they attack, and I have people that are, from devil worshiping websites and gay, lesbian websites, and you name it, I have them attacking day and night. Had death threats from overseas, from Muslims, you name it. They'll do everything they can to destroy God's work. And we have to be brave, and we have to stand up, and we have to keep working. Listen, those people building back Jerusalem because, oh no, we quit, we're scared, we're not going to do it. But no, they kept on with the work and they built it back. What's even worse, though, is sometimes the opposition can come from inside the church. And that is even more dangerous. The church in general can stand a lot of pressure from the outside, but once it gets on the inside, it makes it much harder. So we have to be careful of both those on the outside and those that may also be on the inside. which leads us into the next passage, Ezra 4, verse 2. Ezra 4, verse 2. They come to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do. And we have sacrificed to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." So we have to be careful who builds with us, who builds the spiritual house with us. Now these people, they wanted to come in and they wanted to help build, but that wasn't really their intention. They really wanted to destroy. They really wanted to destroy. And sometimes we have that in a church. Sometimes we have that in a church. Listen, I was in a church once that a man came into the church and said he'd been in the Church of Christ all his life, and he really wanted to help, and he dressed really nice, and he spoke well, and he started throwing money around here and there, and you know, at first we thought that this guy was going to be a real help in the church, and we were really glad that he was here and all that. But then we found out that he was doing all kinds of bad things. He's going around talking about other members to other members. He was trying to rip members off. He had a business practice that he was doing that he was trying to get the members to do, and it was just a big rip off. And you know, he was bringing people in and baptizing them, which normally would be a wonderful thing, but we found out the reason he was doing it was because he was making all these promises to them. I'll pay your rent, I'll do this, I'll hire you as my employee. And when we found out about all this, of course, there had been a certain amount of damage he'd already done, and it was a difficult situation, but we had to cut him off. He couldn't, you know, we thought he was going to help us build the church. But he was not building it in a scriptural way. And it ended up causing much damage. We've got to be careful who we build with. I just had a friend call the other day, and he was talking about something their church wanted to do, which you know, it was a noble thing they wanted to do, and it was a good thing. But he was talking about getting government grants for it. Government grants. And listen, folks, the church pays for God's work. We don't ask the outside world to pay for our work. In fact, when we take an offering on Sunday, we do not ask non-Christians. Now, some non-Christians do, but we do not ask non-Christians to give to the offering. It is the church's work is the work of the church. And I told this guy, I said, listen, once you start taking government money for anything, then you are under the government's thumb. You are under the government's thumb. And if you're taking stuff from the government to, you know, let's say to help feed poor people, you know, the church members are going to work and have this place where they're going to feed the hungry. Wonderful work. If they start taking government money, well, listen, if we're feeding people, we should also be teaching them, right? That's what Jesus did. As an example, Jesus did. He'd teach the people, and then he'd take some bread and some fish and feed everybody. We have to do that a little different, don't we? But you know, you take government money, and they're going to tell you sooner or later what you can or can't teach or preach. And it's just wrong anyway, because there again, God's people support God's work. So we got to be careful who we build with. We've got to be sure. We need to make sure they're on our side, truly on our side, and that they have the same goals. They don't have their own intentions. They don't have, you know, where they want to change the Lord's church or you know, take advantage of people, whatever it might be. We need to be careful who we build with. We need to be careful who we allow to be preachers. We need to be careful who we allow to be preachers. There's an awful lot of preachers out there that don't believe and do not teach the truth, at least not the whole truth. We've got to be careful who we put in as elders. Listen, I've worked with some elders that These people are doing terrible things to the church. Terrible, ungodly things to the church. Allowing musical instruments and ladies to lead the church service, saying that the denominational people are saved, and we go on and on and on. And these are elders that many, many, many years ago I worked with, and they're terrible, terrible people. They're to be leaders, and leaders are to lead. Leaders affect the nation. You don't think so? Look what's going on in our own nation. We have some leaders now that are affecting the nation, don't we? Leaders leading. You need to be careful who you put in, to put in the right leaders who are going to build the Lord's house, the spiritual Lord's house, the right way. Jude verse 20. Jude verse 20. But you, beloved, building yourselves up on your most holy faith, praying in the Holy Spirit. So, building yourselves up, we also, and of course, when we build ourselves up, we're going to help to build the church. But we need to build ourselves up, and we need to remember to build others up in the church also. So we must look to ourselves. How are we growing? Are we becoming stronger? Are we becoming stronger? Listen, I've been watching some shows lately, and you can watch some of these in the World Video Bible School, but I've also been watching some secular shows about ancient civilizations, ancient places in the world. And if you haven't watched those in World Video Bible School, I believe it's called Bible Land. So I would really encourage you to go to the World Video Bible School. You can go there on YouTube. And they just have some wonderful, wonderful shows about these ancient biblical civilizations. But some of them have lasted for thousands and thousands of years. Why? Because they've built, the material they used was strong material. And it hasn't been destroyed through time and all that stuff. And it's still, many of them are still standing there strong as ever. Where a lot of houses that we build today out of wood are not going to be here 100 years from now. So we need to become strong stones. We need to build ourselves up. We also need to help build other individuals up. Give them encouragement. Give them strength to be strong also. 1 Corinthians 3 verse 9. 1 Corinthians 3 verse 9. Isn't this wonderful? For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field. You are God's building. So we're God's fellow workers. Does God need us? Does God have to use us? No. No, listen, when I had a young son, he wanted to come out and help me, and he was more of a hindrance than a help. But I let him help me because he wanted to, and he enjoyed it, and he liked it, and it was a bonding experience. Does God need us? No. In fact, sometimes we're a hindrance. We're slow. We're clumsy. We don't do it right. But God still wants us to be his fellow workers because he loves us, and it draws us close to him, and it shows him how much we love him. So we are to be fellow workers. Just as the church building is useful to us as God's people. I tell you what, in Winslow, it gets windy here. It gets windy here. In the last month or so, we've had a lot of bad wind. And I'm so thankful we got a building to be in when all that wind is happening. So just as this building is useful to us, we are useful to God by being his fellow workers. We are useful to God if we take care and we strengthen ourselves for God's work. To be those useful people. We are God's field. He's growing us. He's growing us. He's growing us up. He's given us what we need to grow. And there again, we're God's building that we need to maintain. We need to keep it clean. We need to keep it pure. We're the temple of God. And the temple of God needs to be clean. This church building there, again, as I talked earlier, if people come in here and there's trash everywhere and graffiti on the wall and stuff, guarantee you most of them not going to come back. We keep it clean because we want to keep it safe for people, sanitary. We want to keep it nice looking so that people will find it a joy to come here. It's the same thing with our souls. We need to keep ourselves clean, and we need to keep ourselves pure, and we need to keep ourselves useful for the work that God has for us to do. Oh, church, hear me as we close. Do everything that you can to build the Lord's church, to strengthen it, to get it down a few more yards in that spiritual football field, to not be discouraged if your church is going through a time of trial and struggle. Don't give up. All churches do. Over time, all churches have struggles and trials and problems. Don't quit. Don't run. Don't give up. There's work that we need to be doing. And it's the greatest work there is that we can do. Listen, we can build empires in this world. We can do all kinds of things. We're still going to die and leave it behind. That empire is not going to last forever. And in the end, it's all going to be vanity. But the work we do for God is going to last forever. We will be rewarded for it personally, and we will be rewarded for it in this life and the happiness. Listen, when I baptize somebody, I am so happy and so overjoyed. And we'll leave that fulfilled, content life that those in the world will never know, because they're trying to fill that vacuum in their life of sex and drugs and alcohol, money, and all kinds of things. But we lead a fulfilled, content life because it's filled with Jesus Christ. If there's any here tonight who are listening, who's not put on the Lord in baptism, I beg you and I plead with you today, get a hold of a Church of Christ in your area. Call them, go visit them. I know you'll be happy that you did. Tell them you want to be saved. You want to know that you're saved. You want to know what the Bible says about being saved. And they will, Lord willing, be able to tell you. If you're watching this video today as part of your worship service for Sunday, please remember to do the other acts of worship, to do the Lord's Supper, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to the Lord, to give to the Lord of your means, and to pray to the Lord. All these are acts of worship that we see a pattern of in the Bible that the church needs to do each and every Sunday in order to worship our Lord and God in a proper way. I hope that you have a wonderful week. I want to thank you for watching. If you have found this video useful, please share it with others. May God bless you.